Welcome to episode 8 of the Hail Married podcast. I'm A Toves, and I'm joined by my husband, the Toves. We're going to make some hot takes on our second attempt at a bowl game this season, as well as throw some Hail Mary shots down the field for our listeners to love or hate. I know you want to get into talking about the game, but before we do that, I feel like we have to talk about the fact that a bowl game almost didn't happen for the runners this season. They'd accepted an invite to the Frisco Bowl on December 13th to play SMU, and then about 2 days later had that bowl canceled due to COVID issues at SMU. Luckily, Lisa Campos was able to jump into action and secure arguably a better bowl invite within just a few hours to this first responder bowl. Then, of course, we got the news on Wednesday of last week that Coach Traylor had tested positive for COVID and wasn't going to be able to make the game. And while they kept saying, we're going to play no matter what, this is, what we're going to want to do for the guys, there was kind of a couple of moments there where it seemed like, I don't know, that this is going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I think in terms of the first game, I still, even talking to you before this bowl game, I mentioned to you that there was what seemed like there was warning signs because, everybody's posting their bowl tickets, online or whatever. And we had purchased some, and we noticed that when we had opened the app, that the tickets weren't in there, and they kept saying, "Oh, they'll be there in a few hours." But we actually bought them pretty early on,
right?
So it didn't make sense why they hadn't been delivered. Essentially, I think it was that Sunday night when we bought them, or that Sunday afternoon, and so it just seemed like something fishy was up. And then even the next day on that Monday, they still weren't in the app. So it got me curious. And then finally, I think it was Tuesday, maybe Wednesday, where everything starts really going down. But it felt like you had the warning signs there, and we should have known that something was up because we weren't getting our tickets or anything.
Right.
So I don't know. I mean, I think, we both had this when it was coming to this bowl. I think we learned our lesson from the first one just by thinking, you know what, we're not going to know if this game is going to take place until really Christmas Day. Christmas Day is going to tell us. And you even freaked out because I think it was on Christmas Day, wasn't it? Or maybe Christmas Eve, when you saw there was a tweet from one of the players. I think it was Tariq, wasn't it?
Yeah, I don't remember. One of the players had posted something like, "We're not going to Dallas," and then the rest of it was like to mess around or something like that. But I just saw, "We're not going to Dallas," and I was like, "Wait, what?"
So for our listeners, I just got to tell you, she saw that tweet and she lets out this huge gasp. All of a sudden, we're on the couch, we're just watching TV, and she just lets out this huge gasp. We're like, "Oh my God." And then she actually reads the entire tweet, and then we realize, oh, it's really just they have unfinished business essentially. So I think any other year, and this is like a problem, but because this year has been so unique in terms of the football season, how games have been canceled, pretty quickly. I just had a feeling that if this one got canceled, there was going to be no makeup. UTSA would no longer be in a bowl game. So, while it's a shame that they wouldn't have been able to potentially play in the bowl game, I think it still would have left sort of that taste for next season to say, we didn't get to go to the bowl. Our bowl games were canceled because it wasn't us, but it was canceled. So,
well, I think that just the fact that it started to see then signs a week later, that something we started to hear that there were more cases, although, Traylor was always cagey about whether those cases were football or not or whatever. And then to hear him test, it was like, okay, well, is this going to be something that happens on the UTSA side? But, the other, of course, irony with this whole thing is that we ended up playing at SMU Stadium. So it was like we were playing SMU in the Frisco Bowl, and then we played at SMU. So just, I guess, and to sum it up, it's just a fitting sort of end to just a crazy year, right?
Absolutely. Because, like we kind of already mentioned, we weren't even sure this bowl game would go. There was, there's so much uncertainty this season that you felt like Christmas Day, if you don't hear anything from either team, then it's going to happen. But it was like, are we going to open our presents and that's going to be it for the season? Whatever we got for Christmas, that's it.
Yeah.
Or, do we actually get that game?
Once I heard that they had loaded the buses and they were like on the way, I felt like, okay, it's going to happen. Again, I don't know who's showing up, but it's going to happen. But it wasn't until then.
Yeah, even then I was still skeptical because, this season, I mean, it would not have really, I would say, stunned me if these guys get up to Dallas, Louisiana gets up to Dallas, and then both get shut down because of some issue.
Great. Yeah, that's true.
So, yeah, I mean, it was an odd beginning to the bowl season. We could have been the first bowl played, kind of like we were in 2016. We end up probably being, I would say, the best game within this kind of stretch of games up until really Coastal Carolina and Liberty played.
Mm-hmm.
But I would say it was probably the best game because it was one of the closer games.
Right.
Everybody else was more of a blowout. So, that was a nice after Christmas, I'd say, taste of a little extra present.
Yep. All right, let's get into the game. UTSA came away from the First Responder Bowl with another heartbreaking loss against a ranked opponent. We came into the game shorthanded from both a coaching perspective and a player perspective. As I mentioned earlier, Coach Traylor tested positive earlier in the week for COVID and couldn't attend the game. Coach Philo was also absent, as well as other staff members. And there were several key players unavailable for undisclosed reasons, including Brendan Brady, Tyke Ogle-Kellogg, Jamal Ligon, Avery Morris, among others. We were down 24-7, and the Roadrunners mounted an impressive comeback in the second half, with 17 unanswered points to tie the game in the fourth quarter at 24-24. It was a gritty effort by the Roadrunners, but unfortunately, they just came up short after Louisiana scored in the fourth quarter. Ultimately, the Roadrunners fell in their second bowl game, 31-24. So I know, we typically kind of talk about offense and defense, but, I think you wanted to kind of tackle this a little bit differently.
Of course, it's a special bowl edition, right?
Yeah.
So we kind of want to go through each quarter. I think just looking at it from that perspective, at least for the bowl game, I think you kind of start seeing a better narrative to the story. So you start out the first quarter. There's that. Going into the game, I had told you, just between us, weather's going to play a factor here. It's December. Like in the first bowl game against New Mexico, there was a cold front that came in, and so it was quite windy. It was a stiff wind that was going through, and we felt it pretty good, and you could see it on the field as well, and how that affected. It wasn't, I would say, two teams at that point that were effective passing, but I think that this being a different team, a team that needs to have some of that to kind of open things up for Sincere. And really the challenge for Frank Harris to be able to throw downfield. It was going to be interesting to me to see how they came out. And so I think the most shocking thing for me really off the bat was just the fact that first of all, we saw the sort of kind of size disparity between the offensive line and our defensive line.
Right.
And, you mentioned it right away. Well, these guys look big.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, they definitely, the offensive line for Louisiana was, it seemed like they were much taller than most of the guys on our defense. So, you kind of knew right then and there that it was going to be a tough matchup. I mean, not that we didn't already know that, and the fact that Louisiana was a ranked team and, they've played well this year, but, just seeing that height disparity between the two, it was like, oh, all right, it's going to be interesting.
Yeah, and I've seen that disparity before at times when UTEP was in sort of, I forget the coach's name before Dimmel was there, but he was an offensive line coach, and they had some big guys, but they weren't very good.
Mm-hmm.
This being 19th or ranked, Louisiana, these guys were good. Like,
oh yeah.
And that was really the part that I was really kind of aiming towards. And the reason I wanted you to say about the size disparity, because this is the first time I've seen UTSA's defensive line get pushed around.
Mm-hmm.
Immediately from watching it the first time and then us doing this rewatch just a while ago, you could see essentially the defensive line getting pushed back at least 3-4 yards,
right,
and making it so easy for their running backs, Ragas and Mitchell, to essentially get to the second and third levels of our defense without getting touched. And once you're getting blown back like that, it just makes it so difficult because now they've got control of the game. And that, I think, to me, they quickly gained control of the game in that manner. They started running on us. And while they had some problems passing because they were going into the wind. So if you're watching the game on the TV screen, if you went from essentially from left to right on the TV screen, the wind was coming from the right. So, if you're going with the wind, it would have been, if you're watching the screen, right going to left. So in the first quarter, Louisiana was up against the wind, and you could kind of tell, especially when they had one of the first pass interference calls on Mayfield. He got called for it, and I think it was really because it looked like he may have grabbed or kind of interfered with the receiver a little bit before that pass was made.
Mm-hmm.
But then he also kind of like hooked the receiver a little bit. It seemed a little ticky-tacky, but the ball kind of hung up in the air. And I think that's the first clue that if you're going up against the wind, if you don't have a good pinpoint pass or you think you're just going to be able to launch some balls down the field, it's not going to work because you're going to be facing a stiff wind. And I think that kind of began the whole part of within those first few drives for Louisiana that I felt like if UTSA got some pass interference calls on them as well. Like Woolen, I think, got a pass interference call later on in the next drive. Really kind of saved a touchdown. But again, if those guys have like their head on a swivel, and if there is no face guarding in college, but if they're turned towards the ball and they're looking for the ball, they might be able to make more of a play on the ball and not interfere with the receivers. But you could also tell from a secondary's point of view with these long, lanky receivers that Louisiana had, we were chasing those receivers. It looked like we were caught flat-footed on the secondary, which is also, again, disappointing. Like, the defensive coordinator is Jess Lepp. He's the secondary coach. So it just seemed like there was some problems early on the defensive side of the ball. On the offensive side of the ball, we could run the ball. It just seemed like we came out passing. But again, I think the reason we came out passing, and I know that was kind of noted, I think, within UTSA Twitterverse, but it was because we had the wind to our back. So right. I think I would say that it was clear to me that Lunny was really wanting to take advantage of the fact that they had the wind on their back, and that they could maybe get away with trying to throw some balls down the field because Frank, even though he doesn't have a very strong arm, you get the wind to your back, you can launch a couple of them.
Yeah, it was just that kind of ill-advised throw there on that first drive for the interception that, kind of killed us. I mean, we were moving the ball so well up until that point. And it was kind of took a little bit of wind out of our sails.
Yeah, and I think, unfortunately, I think that's when he started pressing. It's like he wanted to really kind of put on the Superman cape and like put the team on his shoulders, but it wasn't needed at that point. At that point, it was just he needs just to be efficient. Just make the smart throw.
Right.
If the throw's not there, either try to scramble for a few more yards or throw the ball away. I mean, again, it's live to continue. You don't want to turn the ball over. You turn the ball over, and you're digging a hole for yourself.
Yeah, I mean, because again, up until that point, he'd done a pretty good job, moving the ball, and given the amount of time that UTSA had off, and this concern that they were going to come out rusty. We've had slow starts in the past. I mean, they actually came out with a pretty good tempo. Better than what we've seen, in a lot of games in the past. So
yeah, and
it was a little frustrating.
It was, and I think it was disappointing, and it was I don't want to say that failure is always good, but it was good to see him fail, early on, because it usually motivates people to come back and say, okay, I messed up. I need to come back. And I need to get that, get that one back. And he kind of did, essentially. I think it was the second or third drive when we come back. I think we missed the field goal, but we still, again, driving down the field, still playing well. Really, the biggest thing there after the interception from Frank was the fact that for whatever reason Louisiana decided to go for the fake field goal. I think they were trying to immediately plunge the stake into our heart and try to see what kind of momentum they could take away from us,
right,
and not let us start momentum. And again, our boy Trevor Harmonson comes through and breaks it up. I gotta hand it to Coach Perry of special teams, because I would say past UTSA teams get the allow the touchdown. But Harmonson, again, like against Southern Miss, he heard them call out that it was going to be some sort of fake, or he recognized immediately, and he was disciplined enough to stay with us. Once again, I don't know if he recognized it, but all I know is that he was there to make that play, and good for him. Like, clearly they studied their film and they were on top of things. So, but it still felt like the Cajuns controlled this quarter. Like, while they weren't able to kind of throw the haymaker or like kind of knock us out, they were controlling the game. It was clear they seized control on offense and defense, and it was now up to us to try to like counter with something.
Right.
So, I mean, we end up getting a touchdown on Frank. Essentially, I would say he faked out everybody in the stadium, because it seemed like Sincere had the ball, but being able to essentially, I'd say, tuck it and run in. Obviously a really good play, but that was essentially the bread and butter play of UTSA all year. Sort of that read option play.
Yeah. And, from the very beginning, Louisiana struggled to figure out how to defend Frank running the ball. They did a pretty good job defending Sincere running the ball. I mean, he was getting yards, but they were short yards. He didn't have that breakout. But when Frank kept the ball and ran, all throughout the game, Louisiana struggled with that. They didn't seem to have an answer for Frank. So, it was good to see them, kind of going to those quarterback design plays. In some cases, it was Frank, not being patient, but, it was successful. It was working. So, it was good to see that we were able to move the ball forward.
No, absolutely. And I think one thing to note here, and I'm sure everybody saw this if they watched the game, but Brendan Brady you had mentioned was out. So Kedrick Cobbs was actually the running back that came in. He got a few carries, but then he got injured.
Right.
And so you started seeing Frank run the ball more, and it seemed, and even the announcer said as much, it seemed like the reason that he started running it more is because he didn't have any sort of backup depth, which was kind of interesting because BJ Daniels did not get it. I didn't see him go into the backfield at all. He was only on special teams, and I think you had noted that when we were preparing for this. But on the rewatch, when we heard the announcers, they were they made that kind of comment that now Harris is sort of like the backup running back to Sincere. So I think, again, this is where you kind of see, and we'll kind of talk about it a little bit later, but you see someone that's clearly missed on offense.
Right.
And then, I think on defense, you start missing Ligon. And not so much, I think more just for the linebacker depth. I think Monkey did okay, but he was getting, they were taking advantage of him being in there. They were running towards this side. They were, kind of, exploiting some of, unfortunately to say, it's like the weaknesses of the UTSA offense or defense, but they were trying to figure out exactly what to take advantage of. They did, and put us in the hole. I mean, I still think UTSA could have countered a little better, but unfortunately, because they were inefficient, because they just weren't taking advantage of their opportunities and really executing. You saw the difference in Louisiana. They executed. And so we're going into halftime now, essentially Now we're down 17-7. And so that's what I think kind of leads into the great. You got the last 2 quarters. You don't have Jeff Traylor there. What is the coaching staff going to do?
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, we come out of halftime. The team looks like they're set to, take over in the second half. And you kind of mentioned before at times that we're a second half team. So obviously hopes were high.
Yep.
Second offensive play. Frank takes a low snap from Maka. Maka, my boy. Anyway, it's a bad snap. Frank mishandles it, and instead of just eating the ball and just taking the sack, and then us saying, okay, we're gonna have a 3rd and long, whether we would go on to actually convert or not, I think is besides the point. That's going to be always a big what if. But the thing is that it felt like this is, if we were on the tipping point of anything, this was the tipping point of us falling apart.
Mm-hmm.
Because, he tries that ill-advised shuffle to Sincere, who wasn't even close to him. And, you can see it various ways. But if you're just a Frank Harris super fan, you're going to say, well, he got hit, and that's why. The ball didn't get to Sincere. If you're just a Frank Harris hater, you're gonna say he was already falling apart. His bad decision making just continued. Blah blah blah. I think the middle line is he just didn't make the smart play. And here again, he's trying to force something that he shouldn't be trying to force.
Yeah, and to Frank's credit, I think, because he's been so successful at times making plays out of nowhere, particularly scrambling, when the pocket collapses, or running, when people think he's going to take a sack, I think he really truly believes that he can make something out of nothing all of the time. And so that was, just his second nature to try to pass the ball over to Sincere and get a couple of yards or make a play when, again, the smart move would have been just to go down.
Well, sure. I mean, but I would say, just to add to that, of course you want to give it to Sincere. You've got the essentially nation's leading rusher. And right. So why not try to get it in the ball in his hands? But I saw that he was covered. Maybe he wasn't as covered as I thought he was. But again, Sincere was further away than I think Frank realized. And again, eat the ball, just take the sack, and let's just go. It of course leads to the touchdown that puts us down now by 17. And how are they going to respond? This next drive was going to be everything. We get the first down on this next drive. However, passing wise, we don't go anywhere, and puts us in a bad position again. And I think I was frustrated was just that we've got the wind to our back. We're ruining the opportunity to maybe really get aggressive here.
Well, and even before, the offense came on the field, that was the drive where we had the penalty against BJ Daniels for the illegal block. So we had a special teams issue that backed us up. And then, we came on offense and, struggled, even though he made that one pass. We struggled and ended up having to punt. And then again, you have Lucas Dean making an uncharacteristic error. So it just sort of seemed like at that point things were really going to get out of hand.
And this is where I thought that maybe we might really miss Traylor, because, we keep talking now and talking about this narrative of things are falling apart. Things are really the bowl game, just to be competitive now is really getting out of grasp. So are we going to become, and I fear to say this, I don't want to say it, but do we become our emotional color neighbors of the North while we were there in Dallas? Do we become North Texas all of a sudden and let this snowball into, getting blown out by 30? That's not what happens to me, which defines the Traylor era so far. There's not really blowouts, but it sure seemed like that.
Right.
Well, here comes DeMarco Guidry, and he made just a great play, I thought, in terms of getting his helmet on the ball, popping the ball loose, and until we really, I think, watched it on TV and just looked at that rewatch, didn't realize just how close it was that Harmonson had to have really recovered inbounds.
Right. It was a really great play by him because, it could have been one of those situations where we're, having a different discussion, like, oh, we should have gotten that, and fumble recovering. We didn't, because it could have got out of bounds very easily.
And it could have just turned, here we have a young team. I mean, as much as we've been, harping on some of the mistakes and saying, look, here's things just didn't go our way. But it could have been crushing, even more crushing to this young team. And before you know it again, now it really spirals out of control. Now Lundy may have to take a timeout to just potentially just calm down the whole team. But that's not what occurs. And so essentially we now get some bombs away. And things that I've already kind of talked about is we hadn't really been throwing the ball downfield. And Lundy kind of mentioned that in the second half, they looked to be more aggressive. Uh-huh. I don't know how I feel about that. I felt like maybe they should have been a little more aggressive earlier, especially in the first quarter. Maybe that's what just the throwing the ball around was. And then the interception happens, and that kind of puts Lundy back in a safe place and maybe just gets him a little too conservative. But it just felt like once that passing game really got going, now you saw the UTSA you'd seen all year. And I just got to say that some of the better throws on these next ensuing drives that UTSA has with Frank were some of his better throws of the season. I mean, right. Zakari on his touchdown pass, he really got the inside position on the cornerback, and when he did, I saw it just because it was close to us. But as soon as I saw him get the inside position, I started freaking out. So I was like, he's got the inside position. And it looked like Frank recognized that as well. I mean, obviously it was close enough to be able to see, but it seemed like his eyes got bigger and he just put it in the right spot. Like, again, this is the Frank Harris that we've seen against UTEP, against North Texas, when he's put up giant numbers. We don't need giant numbers. We need the medium numbers and to make those the right plays at the right time. And that ball was terrific just to get Zakari the ball. Get him a chance to high point it.
Right.
So then we have that drive, we make another stop, and then here we come back again. Oscar Cardenas had a fantastic game, I thought, blocking wise. Just an unsung hero the whole time, but he makes a couple of grabs here and there. And I think that's actually later on, but we still march down. And there was a great pass from Harris to Cephas for that touchdown to put it at 24-21, where Harris really put it in just the right spot. It was low. It was away from the defenders. And put it where Cephas could get it. And, here he is kind of spreading the ball out. And I think that was also a good sign because he's really getting it to all his receivers. I think when we talk about aggression, here's our chance, and I feel like these are the two most talented wide receivers that UTSA has ever had in their history. We have Zakari and Cephas. And I always questioned that last year because I didn't think that they really were. But as much as I watched them this year, you can tell there's just a difference to them as opposed to the guys that came before them. And that's not a knock on the guys that came before them. There's, you had a limited teams up until now. It just seems like now we just have more team speed, more talent, and you can really see it with Zakari and Josh. And, I felt like Frank really gave them a chance to make plays. And I really wish that we were still a little more aggressive in just making sure that we gave them a chance to make some plays. Because Oscar, then on the next drive that we finally get the ball, we start driving again. And this is where we both had mixed feelings because Oscar makes a great catch and really takes it down to about I want to say is like around the 10. He makes a 21-yard catch. He gets that face mask penalty called. And we're close. It's 24-21 now. And it looks like we've really got him on our heels. And I had told you before, I just feel like we need to go for it right here.
Right.
There's like 9 seconds or so left in the third quarter. We had Louisiana on the ropes. Call one more play. Let's just call one more play. And let's just see if we can get a cheap call or something. If we can get a pass interference, we're at the 1-yard line. Whatever. But something that we're going to go against the wind as we, turn around. So, like, let's not let them circle the wagons at, the beginning of the fourth quarter. I felt like they circled the wagons in their fourth quarter, and that let Louisiana back in. What did you think?
Yeah, and this may have been one of those times where, we'll talk about, Traylor's absence later, but this might have been one of the times where he may have played this differently because he tends to come across more aggressively in the red zone. And sometimes that's been frustrating because we've seen him try to go for it instead of taking a field goal. But I think this is one of those times where I think he probably would have tried to run another play. The other thing that we haven't really talked about in the third quarter, and one of the other reasons why I think we should have been more aggressive at that point was because Louisiana was really making a lot of mistakes in the third quarter. This was, from their perspective, they had some other penalties early on, but they had really some big penalties that killed their drives. When they were on offense, they had almost gotten the ball intercepted by Robinson on one of their drives. They had a holding on offense. They had that ineligible receiver that called back the really long pass downfield. So they had really gotten out of sync on offense. They were making mistakes. Their defense was struggling. I think this was really the time to just, punch them between the eyes.
You're right. And one thing I didn't mention was Zakari's Daniel Jones impersonation when he
caught the ball.
when he caught the ball on the long, was it the 60-yard bomb or whatever?
Yep.
It just seemed like he made the catch in stride and then all of a sudden lost his balance.
Yeah,
a la Daniel Jones. Yeah,
came up and tripped him.
Yeah, and so much momentum and aggression there in the third quarter, and now we're heading to the fourth quarter, and it felt like we weren't able to punch it in. We get the field goal, and essentially, this is essentially where the story ends offensively for UTSA, because then Louisiana comes back. They have a long drive, which you even said was just such a long drive. I can't believe they drained
the clock. I mean, it was 12 plays, 72 yards, took 6 minutes off the clock. I mean, there really only were 3 drives. And, we finished with the field goal and then 3 other drives in the fourth quarter.
I mean, and again, it goes back to them pushing us around on the defensive line, because they were able to do that early. They just wore us down. And, we talk about, there was I think they said about 20 players missing. So who knows how many actually contributors were missing. I mean, they never made any sort of, changes or edits to that, the 2 deep roster. So I didn't see that there was a lot of shuffling on the defensive line. And so I think essentially it started to wear us down. And
right.
If we were getting punched early, it was going to make it even more difficult later. So that was my concern. That's why I really felt that right there at the end of the third quarter, we needed to take that opportunity. But, we go back to probably the 3 poorest throws or the 2 poorest throws from Frank in the last UTSA drive, where, on third down, he tries to get it out into the right flat. He just doesn't quite get it there. Again, I think the wind caused that. And then on the fourth down, Cephas was open. But he was staring down Zakari on the left-hand side and looked like he was going Zakari the whole way. And just the ball just didn't get there.
Is that the one he threw to Zakari or was it to Cardenas?
It was Zakari because it was fourth down and Zakari was coming around and Sincere kind of came under him and was trying to get out to the sideline.
So he threw to Cardenas on third down and then Cephas on fourth down?
It could have been, yeah. But regardless, it was, Cephas was open. Had he just kind of looked back to his right, he was getting pressured, but I think if he had, again, bought some times with his legs and really tried to fight for that fourth down, he would have seen Cephas open going across the middle. And I think he catches it. But after that, we did see that Cephas really got upset with Frank.
Yeah.
There was just some back and forth. At least Cephas was just really upset and seemed to get himself out of the game. And that was unfortunate. But again, things that we didn't normally see because we don't sit on the UTSA side.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Cephas had been upset with Frank prior to that. And so, you almost wonder too if that's one of the reasons why I wasn't necessarily looking for him, because it seemed like, I think it was the drive before that where Cephas had gotten upset with Frank about something that had happened. So it seemed like there was some friction for sure between those two, or at least from Cephas to Frank.
Yeah, and I mean, again, it's our perception. It's what we believe that we saw, and wherever it goes from there. But I would say overall, this ends the game. 31-24. again, it seemed like Louisiana got control in the fourth quarter, again, with that long drive.
Mm-hmm.
So you look at it, 3 out of the 4 quarters, they control, they dominate, they pushed us around on, essentially on defense. On offense, we just weren't able to be as efficient enough. We had a good stretch, but ultimately we just fall short. So 31-24 it ends. I thought Lunny did a admirable job coaching. I thought they all kind of did what they could, but unfortunately it was just going to be short. So that was the ball game.
Yep. With all of that being said, what did we learn from this game?
Well, we missed certainly everybody that was not there in terms of the players. Especially, I would say that the 2 focal points for me were Brendan Brady and Jamal Ligon. Ligon really, I don't know that he really changes the outcome on defense. Defensive line was still getting pushed around. There's nothing that he would have been able to do to help the defensive line. But certainly given that linebackers some depth, and I think he makes maybe a couple more plays and provides a little more steadiness at middle linebacker than, say, Monkey did.
Mm-hmm.
Monkey still played relatively well, but you wish you had Ligon there, especially since he's a freshman, gets his first shot at a bowl. So let him cap that off. With Brendan Brady, it's such a lost year. I mean, if 2020 was defined in terms of a UTSA player, I think it's Brendan Brady, because he was injured. He got injured early, and he was out, and he just never really got to get rolling, and that's a shame, because I think that he's a nice compliment to Sincere. So
well, and we got to see in the game that Sincere was out in UTEP really what we were missing, because Brady had a great game. That really was his signature game, with Sincere being out. And so, you just kind of look at that in a vacuum and say, okay, if we would have had him for the whole season to complement Sincere, what else could we have accomplished?
Right. And I think a lot of it too is in the passing game, because I felt like not only I think, again, I've said it before, Brendan Brady's a great pass blocker. It's also just him being able to get catch some passes out of the backfield. So I think we need to get to Sincere in that capacity, just to make him even more all world, I guess I should, really should say. But those were the main absences, and they hurt. They really did. At some points they hurt. I just don't think that they necessarily changed the outcome of the game.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing was, we kind of have talked about Frank Harris, and he had, I think, a good game. Certainly, it could have been much better. Those 2 turnovers really hurt.
Mm-hmm.
Louisiana wasn't able to take advantage of the first turnover, but on the second turnover, they did.
Mm-hmm.
And so I know it's going to eat at him. We saw after the game, that he was
just gutted. Yeah,
he was gutted. And you know what? Here's my Hail Mary take here for this podcast episode. I think it's great. I think it's going to eat at him, and I think it's a great motivation for him, especially the way he's talked about before, about some of the kind of the chip that he has on his shoulder in terms of, what drives him.
Mm-hmm.
If you want guys making mistakes, we've seen it, whether it's in, our professional lives or even in athletics, and, Coach Traylor has talked about it too, is perfect effort. You want them running into the wall. You want them going full speed at that wall and running into it. And the mistakes he made were just that. They were dumb, but he ran right into the wall, and let that be the motivation for next year. For 2021, Frank Harris is, if he's still the starting quarterback, I mean, it's not our decision. I'm not saying that he won't be, but
and he's going to have tough competition with a healthy Lowell and Adkins next year. So he's going to have to earn that spot again. So hopefully he takes this as motivation. It makes him better. And, again, we'll see which one of those 3 come out on top after spring ball, which hopefully there is spring ball in fall camp.
Yeah, I mean, I think for the offense's sake, we need some continuity at quarterback. We need somebody steady there. And so if those mistakes linger with him and it forces him to really think or play smarter, I think we're in a good position for 2021.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about, Traylor's absence. Overall, my thoughts were that, because Traylor has instilled such a great culture, both with, his players and with his coaches, we didn't have that void with him being out that we might have had otherwise. You mentioned it kind of with the third quarter comeback rally, but I think Lunny really did a great job of taking over the head coaching reins. It's tough to do both play calling and be the head coach. It's not an ideal situation, but I think he did a great job in that respect. He seemed to do well when it came to game management. There might be a couple of moments that would have gone differently had Traylor been there, but overall, I think Lunny did about as good a job as we could have hoped for.
I think it helps that he has had head coaching experience, and I get that it was interim with Arkansas, essentially like just 2 games, but the fact that he had to prepare, was able to kind of look at how the game should go, and then really his experience, and it just looks like his connection with Traylor. That's why I just didn't feel like there was a lot missed. It felt like these guys both seemed to coach similarly, and so we were not missing as much. So aside from that third quarter shot we've talked about, where they should have tried to sneak in a play there with 9 seconds left, potentially see if they could get something. Again, we're going to assume that Traylor would have gone for it there and would have been a little more aggressive. Maybe just because he's looking at it more globally as opposed to Lunny, having to do the play calling, as you mentioned before. But that's nitpicking. I mean, I think if we're really going to say that Lunny didn't do as good job as Traylor, we're nitpicking at things, and I don't think that serves the coaching staff well. I think there were other coaches that were missing, like Coach Philo, but Traylor putting in the culture he has certainly translates to his coaches as well, and they did a fantastic job. I mean, again, we kept talking about that tipping point. There was a tipping point, things were falling apart, and then we got that rally, and I don't think if that culture's there, and Traylor's influence, then this thing falls apart.
Yeah, I think the only piece of the coaching that seemed a little bit off was in the second quarter. Some of the defense play calls were coming in a little bit late. You could see the defenders getting frustrated, but that has nothing to do with Traylor, because he's not the defensive coordinator.
Lunny.
Well, Traylor or Lunny. I mean,
yeah,
either one of them. I mean, it really has more to do with whatever was happening with Jessup at the time, but it's not a reflection on Traylor's absence or on Lunny's performance.
Yeah, it seems like, I don't know if Jeff Slepp is up in the box, but it seemed like whoever was putting in the signals, it was clear that the defenders we were set. Previously, in other episodes, we've talked about how the guys weren't ready. They were still kind of looking kind of haphazardly at the sideline. They were set, and they were looking at the sideline. They weren't getting the calls, and they would just turn around, and they were doing something. And I think, like you said, that's something that Coach Traylor would have fixed. But it got fixed anyway. I mean, like you said, in the second half, we didn't see that problem again.
Yep. A couple of things before we go. I know we don't typically like to look at our opponents as a model, but Louisiana really has that program model that Jeff Traylor is trying to build here at UTSA in terms of their style of play, as well as the mindset of building a winning culture.
Yeah, it was kind of interesting to note that Coach Traylor and Billy Napier are as close as they were. It seemed like there's a connection there that they know, knew some of the things they do on offense, knew some of the things they do on defense. But I think the biggest thing that we can take away is just looking at potentially how you build a consistent winner and how you start really knocking off some of these. I would say the first thing is knocking off some of these, kind of higher tier G5s, and then kind of moving into the lower tier P5s. That's where UTSA, I think the bar is going to be next, as Traylor continues to build the program. Something we weren't able to do in the Wilson years, but be more of a consistent winner and make sure that we're not necessarily always doing the 8-win, 9-win seasons. But again, I think something that we just need to keep in focus is this was an abnormal year, and as such, it was an abnormal record that we had. So we continue to build from here. It should bode well for the Roadrunners.
Absolutely. Traylor had mentioned that he really wants to see us be able to turn the corner in some of these games where, we played BYU tough, we played them close, we played Louisiana close, But our goal for really next year and as we build the program is to win those games.
And just to look back, this has been said before, not necessarily in UTSA front, but this season, someone else said that, and it was Jake Spavital from Texas State. Like, he has said the same thing. We need to start winning these games. In their case, they just have every single one of their games kind of gets away from them. Mm-hmm. In Traylor's case, you see these games and you're like, you fought so hard against a ranked team, and it's what is the difference between us? And I think, again, depth is a problem still, but it's the execution. I mean, you saw throughout our whole discussion today on the episode, it's really come down to execution. And
we've talked a lot about perfect effort this year, and next year needs to be not perfect execution, but they need to build on that execution.
Right. And I think that was his thing from the beginning of the year was, I need to have these guys playing, full effort all the time, because we hadn't seen that, I would say, in the last couple of seasons. Mm-hmm. Now we have full effort. Now it's time to really sharpen up that execution. And I think that's when we become UTSA looks more like Louisiana. And I think that's when things really start turning the corner for this fan base and for the program itself.
Right. A couple of notable statistics from the game. We haven't talked a whole lot about Sincere McCormick this game. He had a quiet 122 yards rushing on 23 carries. He did surpass Jarvion Williams to become UTSA's leading career rusher. And he also regained the top spot as the nation's leading rusher over Breece Hall in this game. Zachary Franklin also had 5 catches for 115 yards and 1 touchdown. And that became a program record 4th 100-yard receiving game this season. He now ranks 2nd in UTSA history with 10 career receiving touchdowns. So another great sign, given that these are both sophomores and we're talking about, program records for them.
Especially Sincere. I mean, you have to emphasize just how you said it was a quiet day, because it just never felt like there was a big Sincere play. Mm-hmm. And again, testament to Louisiana, but on the other hand, also he still had a good day, but It was rather quiet. So again, just good to see Sincere continuing to succeed.
Yep, absolutely. And while we're not doing offensive or defensive players of the game this time, I got to have a little shout out to my man, Leroy Watson. 2 things with Leroy Watson. At the end of the 4th quarter, when, the offense had just come off of the field, they weren't able to score. Frank was down. Cephas was upset. They kind of walked to the back and sat down on the benches. Leroy Watson comes over and he's like, guys, get over here. We got to, support defense. He's like, don't do this to defense. Like, get up here. And so he was trying to encourage them all to come to the sideline. He got Sincere and to the other guys, to stand on the sideline and to cheer and support the defense. So, and I thought that was a great, kind of testament to the culture that's been established. And it was great to see, a veteran leader on our team really reinforcing that. Like, look, we didn't get our job done. I know you're disappointed, but our job right now is to support, defense who's on the field.
Well, one of the things we had kind of seen beforehand was he was kind of dancing along as some of the songs were being played, during timeouts. And it seemed a little goofy to me, but I think you can tell that Leroy just loves playing football, and he's so happy and fortunate for this opportunity, or at least that's how it comes off to me. Mm-hmm. So to see that leadership, like you just described, was just amazing. Like, what a moment. And, I think that was just
some mad dance skills.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I just think what a moment to catch things that we miss because we sit as season ticket holders on the visiting side. Mm-hmm. I'll second that. I mean, it was such a good moment to see Leroy do that. So
yeah. Well, thanks again for joining us this season on the Hail Married podcast. It's been a lot of fun. I'm Abe Toves.
And I'm the Toves.
We'll be back soon with a special episode to wrap up the season. And we're also working on putting together our long-awaited second part of our special episode, looking back at 10 years of UTSA football. So thanks again for joining us.
Birds up, guys.